In today's show, we continue our season previews looking at Scoot Henderson. What does year 2 look like for the Trailblazers' young point guard? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we are continuing our season preview series, the Locked On Blazers Countdown to Tip-Off, running through every single player on the roster, giving you a brief but thorough look at what they'll bring to the team. We'll talk about what they did last year, talk about best and worst case scenarios, and then role and expectations for the upcoming season. We have done a lot of these. We have 3 players remaining. We've done 12. This is player number 13. We're not going to get to 14 and 15 by training camp because that starts on Monday. But if you've missed any of them, if you're a YouTube viewer, there is a playlist, season preview playlist. Go check it out. If you are a audio listener, they're labeled in your feed. All of them are labeled as season preview. You can go check it out. Great place to start as the season gets rolling around, rolling. For real, it's here. It has rolled around. It's here. As the season gets rolling, great place to start if you are just checking back into the podcast. Or if you're new to the podcast, welcome. Great place to kind of get my takes on everybody on the roster. Today, we're slashing to the rim and hoping we get our feet under us. Talking Scoot Henderson. Let's talk about what Scoot did in his rookie season. We'll look back to look forward in the first segment. As a rookie, Scoot Henderson averaged 14 points, 3.1 rebounds, 5.4 assists. He shot 38.5% from the floor, including 32.5% from the three-point line and 81.9% from the free throw stripe. He was the starter day one coming out of training camp, the number 3 pick in the 2023 draft. He was not your typical teenager, according to Joe Cronin on Media Day. He was supposed to be the guy to take the mantle. The Blazers believed in him. That's why they made him the starter coming out of camp. Night 1, day 1, Scoot got the keys. But Scoot wasn't ready for the keys. And over his first 5 games of his NBA career, he struggled. He shot 34% from the field, 34.9. We'll round up and call it generously. He shot 35% from the field, including 2 of 21 from 3 over his first 5 games and committed 20 turnovers in his first 5. Then he had an ankle injury and he missed 9 games. And so a season that starts super rocky just with the production on the court, like he's not ready, right? Like he looks like a teenager playing point guard in the NBA, and he was supposed to be more than that, right? He was supposed to have 2 years of seasoning in the G League, a little more experience against higher level competition, an NBA ready body, all of these things. Like he was supposed to be like physically and maybe like mentally and skill wise a little further along than your average rookie point guard. But it's hard to play in the league, and Scoot showed that it's hard. Particularly as point guard is a very difficult position to learn. And those first 5 games were rough. Then he gets injured and he misses a couple weeks with an ankle injury. He misses 9 games. He returns on November 22nd against the Utah Jazz. And you know what? My man's rocking goggles. That's pretty fun. Scoot Henderson returns with a new look. What is it? Will it be perhaps his signature look for the remainder, or at least a good chunk of his early NBA career? He's rocking goggles. And he's also rocking a spot on the bench to begin the games. He is no longer your starter. The Blazers, he kind of in some ways he lost his job by getting hurt, but in some ways it's like those first 5 games, it was like, oh man, Blazers got to do something else. And so when he comes back, he comes off the bench for 15 straight games. He is all of a sudden he is a backup, and probably this was better for him in the long run. But in the immediate term, it's like he had some good, he had some better games, he had some bad games. He had his best game of the season, 17-11 off the bench, the day after Christmas against Sacramento. That was his best early season performance. In a January game when he pops back into the starting lineup after 15 games on the bench, Shaedon Sharpe gets hurt, and then Anthony Simons gets sick, and it's like, okay, Scoot's going to play a little bit. He gets back into the starting lineup for 10 games, and at the end of that stretch, he has 33 against the Suns, only it took him 31 shots to do it. And then he goes back to the bench after a big night. It's like he still wasn't quite there. And the Blazers just decided to do what I think is maybe not what I would have done, but a relatively reasonable decision. They started their two best guards. They said, okay, Malcolm Brogdon and Anthony Simons, they're both healthy. Those dudes are going to start. And Scoot Henderson, briefly gets back into the starting group, and now he's back to the bench. And he goes back to the bench in mid-January. They go into the All-Star break about a month later, and he comes out of the All-Star break, participates in the Rising Stars game, and comes out of the All-Star break, and he has a groin injury, an adductor strain. And he doesn't play for the first 8 games out of the All-Star break. And this was, I think, for me, the most deflating part of Scoot's season. It was like, he hadn't been very good in the sort of January, February stretch, but he'd been definitely markedly better, right? Like not good, like he'd had some good with a caveat type of games, but he hadn't been like capital G, no caveat good, but he'd been better than he was early. Like he was clearly improving and taking steps in the direction. And then he comes out and he just misses a couple weeks with this groin thing. And it was like, and he participated in the All-Star weekend, and you just never know with the Blazers after the All-Star break, like what injuries are real and what are nonsense. And that, I think for me, that was the most disheartening point of the season. It was just like, Scoot's not playing. Where this season is headed. What is and at this point, Shaedon Sharpe's season is done. It's like, what's the point of this season if we don't get to see the young players develop? But Scoot gets back, gets healthy, and he returns on March 9th to the lineup after missing 8 games coming out of the All-Star break. And the final 19 games of the season were undoubtedly the best stretch of Scoot's career, the best stretch of his season, the best stretch of his career to date. To close the year, over those final 19 games, he averaged 16.6 points, 3.5 boards, 7.1 assists, 1.3 steals, shot 40% from the floor, 35% from 3 on 5.3 attempts per game, taking about 5 threes a night, making 35% of them, and 82% from the free throw line. He still turned the ball over a lot during that stretch. He averaged 4.5 turnovers a night, but he was undoubtedly better. The shooting was better. The confidence with playmaking was better. You saw more flashes of him being a good playmaker during that stretch. And he closed the season, his final game of the year. He has 30 points, 7 assists with just 1 turnover, and hit 6 3-pointers in a game against Houston. Probably his best dunk of the year in that game too. And then the Blazers say, well, he's dealing with an injury. He's not going to play the final game of the season. And that was that. And that was all we saw of Scoot in year 1. Because then the Blazers decided not to play him in Summer League. And I'll say it here and I'll say it again, I have no idea why. There is no explanation that, to me, why Scoot didn't play in Summer League that feels like, oh, sure, that feels like reasonable or satisfying. Now, playing 4 games in Vegas is going to have no impact, big or small, on Scoot's career long term. It is entirely meaningless. But the decision to hold out a second-year guard who's 20 years old, who really struggled in year 1, didn't make an all-star team or didn't make the all-rookie team. He maybe had a case for it, but not a really strong one. I think the players who made it over him were better than him. I think that's just kind of how it happens. I think it was fair in the end for me. It's like, to not have him play even a little bit, a couple games in Vegas to show he graduated, seemed just silly. It seemed like a silly choice. He was in Vegas. He did some Panini card fan meet and greet stuff. The decision to hold him out, it has no impact on his larger basketball career whatsoever. But it just seemed like a weird organizational decision, and I feel like the Blazers do this from time to time, where it's just like, what are they doing? Why are they going halfway? Why are they not, what are they afraid of? What are they protecting? If they're worried that Scoot's not going to be good, it doesn't matter, because the games are going to start here in the fall, and he's going to be in trouble anyways. If they're worried that maybe too much criticism in the summertime because he struggled, that seems like a red flag in and of itself. Or if they just didn't think he needed it, why? What's going on? Why didn't he need it? It's all very weird. And the reporting, at least from Sean Highkin of Rose Garden, reports that Scoot wanted to play and the Blazers chose not to. I don't get it. Again, not important, but I keep thinking this, particularly preparing for next season and looking ahead for Scoot. The last time we saw Scoot, he was playing his best basketball. He was looking a little bit better, and he still had things to improve. What better space to improve than playing with Donovan Clingan, a guy he might share the second unit with in his second season? It's been a while since we've seen Scoot. I would have loved to see him again and get another glimpse to see where he has grown. It won't matter what he did in Vegas. I think, Shaedon Sharpe played after his rookie season in Vegas, and he didn't look very good. And it was like, to me, it was like, well, that's either really bad news or totally neutral. Even a bad trip to Vegas is totally neutral. So now the anticipation of a player that was supposed to be a, quote, generational point guard is building heading into year 2. It's been months since we've seen him. We've seen flashes of him in workout videos posted to Instagram, or if you're into the Rico Hines open runs, he's out there wearing vintage t-shirts and getting his highlights posted on YouTube. But we haven't really seen him play in a game. I'm excited to see him play in a game again because I want to see where he's grown. He showed, there were bumps, there was ups and downs for sure, but he was much better in the final 20 games than he was in his first 20 games. He improved the way you want players to improve. Not maybe at the speed, and his starting point was maybe a lot lower than you had anticipated, but he certainly got better throughout the season. So heading into year 2, what does the best case scenario look like for Scoot Henderson? And what does the worst case scenario look like for Scoot Henderson? That's what we'll talk about in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money. That's 100x on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. But Prize Picks isn't just going to say you got to get it right to get your money. In fact, they invented Flex Play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Plus, Prize Picks puts its members first, so withdrawals are fast, they're safe and secure. When you win, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. Get that money quickly once you win it. So download Prize Picks. Oh, and Prize Picks is available in Oregon. You can play it. It's available in a bunch of big states, including California, Texas, and Georgia, but it's also available to my listeners here in Oregon. So why not download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, let's talk best and worst case scenarios for Scoot Henderson. These are best case scenarios within reason and worst case scenarios without injury. We're talking things that could reasonably happen, and without things that happen for the worst case scenarios, things that happen on the court, not put people's bodies breaking down. So what's the best case scenario for Scoot Henderson? It's that the shooting stabilizes, the finishing improves, the decision-making takes a leap, and the athleticism that you see from time to time becomes more functional and just more obvious in-game. Scoot Henderson improved at the end of the season to be like a 35% three-point shooter. The league average is a little over 36%. If he settles into the mid-35.5 range, which is very reasonable, he's going to be okay, probably. He's much better off of taking one dribble threes than he is on catch and shoot threes, but he's going to have the ball in his hands a fair amount when he plays, so maybe always being able to take a rhythm dribble before you shoot a three won't be that big of a deal, and improving your catch and shoot three is one of the most easily practiced skills of all of the things that you can sort of build up as a young player. But the finishing has to get there. Shooting below 45% inside 3 feet, according to Clean the Glass, is just it's untenable for someone like him. He's just not going to be an NBA player if he does that. And the best case scenario is that he takes a leap as a finisher, shoots, in the 60% range at the rim. He continues to shoot, the shooting improvement that he showed at the end of the season sticks throughout the season. He's shooting 35.5% from three. He's making his layups and shooting 60% from the rim. The athleticism, that ability to get into the paint and ability to get all the way to the cup is more functional as opposed to the final game against Houston. He probably had his best dunk of his season. He got a loose ball at midcourt. He saw the rim. He attacked. He crammed all over Uncle Jeff Green. Uncle Jeff, who has a Rolodex of incredible posters, got one of his own. we just didn't see much of that from Scoot. The true explosiveness. He looked small often when he played. And the best case scenario is he doesn't look small. He looks like the promised super athlete that we have seen. The best case scenario is that he shoots, he makes layups, and he looks explosive when he plays. And he does all of that while improving his decision-making. A big challenge for him all season long was decision-making. Not just with turnovers. And that was a big deal early, and it kind of continued throughout the whole season. Some of that will improve just by familiarity. But other times it was just like his sort of pass shoot calculation would get messy, and his feet would get a little out of order in the in-between game. So he's going to take a pull-up and he's just totally off balance. So he's taking like a shot he can't make because he doesn't have his base under him. Or because he doesn't have his base under him, he can't shoot when he's open, and he gets deeper into, he has to take a second step, or he has to reload, and he can't shoot, or he can't make the quick play. When he moves quickly and fluidly, when you see Scoot be able to get past someone and, get the ball in his right hand and make decisions, he's a really good decision maker and a really good passer. But sometimes because his mechanics aren't great, and because he's already made that I'm going to drive and shoot, then the decision making gets a little wonky, and he's like, oh, gotta bail out. Or he's like, oh, I'm going to pass, and it's like, oh, that's not there, and he makes some tough reads. The best Scoot makes simple plays. The best Scoot just says, keep the ball moving. Like, a lot of his best passes to me aren't like these crazy flashy no looks. They're just like, catch it and quickly move it. Catch it quickly, get it to the corner. That's just a smart basketball play. Catch it and quickly get to the corner because that's a better shot, and he's already read it a step ahead, or he knows that the help is coming, and if he keeps the ball moving, it's a simple pass. And as the Blazers continue to add maybe some better shooting around him, some of those simple passes could be rewarded from Scoot. The best case scenario is that all of that happens. The shooting, the finishing, the decision-making, the explosiveness. And when we get to the end of the season, Scoot Henderson is undoubtedly one of the top young players in the NBA. No caveats, no conditions, no okay, but if you take this chunk of games and throw out this chunk of games. The best case scenario for Scoot is that when you get to end of year 2, you've forgotten what year 1 looked like, because you remember that this was a very high level prospect coming into the draft, and he looks like it on an NBA court. The best case scenario is the Scoot Henderson we were promised arrives. What's the worst case scenario for Scoot Henderson? It looks similar to year 1. I think, and this is perhaps a spicy take, I think Scoot was bad enough in year 1 that his worst case scenario is he won't even be back at that level. No matter what, I think he's going to be better than year 1, because I think he was that bad to begin the season. He was one of the worst players playing regular minutes in the league in December. Like he really struggled early, and then he came back and he just wasn't any better. He's always going to have some limitations on defense because of his size. He has some physical tools. Like, he's got long arms and giant hands. So he might end up being a pretty good defensive playmaker. And at the end of the year, when he was playing regularly those final 19 games, he was averaging 1.3 steals a game, like a steal and a half. So that might end up being his strength on defense. But he's pretty bad on defense right now, in the way that young players often are. So I don't think he's going to I think he's always going to have challenges there. But so I'm maybe not even expecting, I think that could be about the same. But I think he was bad enough as a shooter, a decision maker, and finisher in year 1 that the worst case scenario is better than that. That is such a low bar that I think the worst case scenario is better than that. The worst case scenario isn't really production for me. Sure, it'll look a lot like year 1. Maybe, he still is like a 40% shooter from the field, and he's a below average shooter from 3, right around 33%, and the turnovers don't get cleaned up, and he remains he still struggles to finish a little bit at the rim still, or a lot of bit like he did in his first season. That'll be there. But I think what actually is the worst case scenario is less about production and more about feel. In the way that the best case scenario is that Scoot removes all doubt. He's undoubtedly one of the best young players in the league. When you're listing off, here are the 5 best dudes under 22 in the league. Scoot's on the list, and there's no doubt about it. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that not only does Scoot leave some doubt about belonging on those lists, the worst case scenario is that he leaves some doubt about what the franchise does next. If you get to the end of year 2 and you head into the draft uncertain of what Scoot can be in a draft that has a bunch of guards in it. The worst case scenario is that the Blazers are uncomfortable about the future of their number 3 overall pick from 2 drafts ago and go into the draft with plans to get another lead guard option because they might need one. The worst case scenario is that the doubts for Scoot are not external and media driven and podcasters and bloggers and whatnot. They're internal. They're with the team. The worst case scenario is that the Portland Trail Blazers organization has doubts about what Scoot can be, and they have to make some decisions because those doubts impact their immediate decision making. The worst case scenario for Scoot Henderson is that we just don't know, and what the way things are leaning, it doesn't look good. And if the organization has to make decisions that would bring in another player to compete with Scoot, that's bad news for everybody involved. Doesn't mean the player that they draft next won't be really good, or whatever, but it's just Scoot. The book won't be out on Scoot after year 2. But you have to. This thing marches forward with him. Like he's gonna be on the team, right? But it's gonna march forward with him. But the worst case scenario is that the doubts are internal. The doubts are held by the organization, and that puts such a weird wrinkle into what decisions get made next summer and into the draft and beyond. Let's talk role and expectations. Because Scoot's probably got some big expectations, but let's talk about his role first, because I think that in and of itself is somewhat interesting. Join me in that third segment. I think it's really interesting. Let me try that tease again. Extremely interesting. Join me in the third segment. Let's talk more about Scoot. First, though, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's number one sports book. Think about it. The sports book that's number one in America. And you know what? They want to make it easier for you to get in on the action. So what they've got over on FanDuel is an app that's got everything all in one place. Say you're watching the NFL. I'm recording this during Cowboys-Giants, at the beginning of week 4 of the NFL season on Thursday Night Football. But this weekend, you'll be back with more games on Sunday and then on Monday. And say you're watching the NFL games this weekend, and in the middle of the game, you got a hunch. You're saying, like, you know what? Trevor Lawrence is going to score. I believe that the Jags are finally going to score a touchdown on this possession. Well, you can go to the FanDuel app, and right there are the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more. And they're all on the same page where you place your bets. It's all right there, so you can make it happen in real time. Plus, if you're a first-time user of FanDuel, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and that's FanDuel.com. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Let's talk role and expectations for Scoot. The role is a tricky one. I think Scoot Henderson starts the year on the bench, which is somewhat curious for a guy who was drafted number 3 overall for a team that projects to be one of the worst in the league, to have a top 3 pick from a season ago not have clear starter minutes in year 2. But if you're talking about earned, I don't think Scoot's earned the benefit of the doubt to be the starter. I don't think he's earned it with his play on the court. And some folks, I don't think I'm one of these people, but some folks really want young players to earn it. You know when Scoot earned it? When the Blazers pledged about $20 million to him by picking him 3rd overall. There's a lot of franchise investment in him playing. But even if he comes off the bench, there's plenty of minutes for him. He'll play about 28 minutes a night, roughly. That's like roughly the minutes I would peg him. I would peg him for it, like coming into the season. If it's like about 28 if he comes off the bench. If he starts, about 32. Like, we're talking a couple minutes each half. It's more about like optics than it is about opportunity. He's going to have plenty of opportunity, and when he plays, he's going to, he's going to get the ball in his hands and a chance to make decisions and a chance to earn that playing time. And if he shows that he deserves it, then you have those weird conversations. Hey, Anthony Simons. Hey, Shaedon Sharpe. One of you's got to get the heck up out of here, and it would be Shaedon Sharpe, unless Shaedon earns it. And then, I think a really great turnout for the Blazers is that their young players are so good that it creates more confusion. What they need is roster confusion because of talent, not sort of roster confusion because of lack thereof. But the roles I'm guessing, it wouldn't surprise me if Scoot starts, but I'm guessing the starting guards will be Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe. That just makes more sense positionally for where the Blazers are headed. It wouldn't shock me if it's Ant and Scoot. It would shock me if it's Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe. That won't happen. If Anthony Simons is on the roster, and he is as of now, on Thursday evening, heading into training camp, he's going to start. That's not a question. So Scoot's going to come off the bench. Expectations, my own expectations for Scoot are kind of teased in the second segment. I think he's going to be better than last year, just because I think the lows were so low, and I think he started to get a little bit better last season. But I came into the year, I'm a draft amateur, but I paid attention to it closely, and I read a bunch of smart people. And my belief, and I said this as much right here on this podcast, is that the expectations for Scoot heading into his rookie season, if you go back and listen to this exact show from last year, is that he should make an all-star team or an all-NBA team on his rookie contract. Because that's what the players who had been the successful players who had been drafted, like the Darius Garlands ahead of him, LaMelo Balls, Ant Edwards, like the lead guard types, the ball in your hand lead guard types, drafted ahead of him, before him, I should say, as top 5 picks. That is a expectation for them on their rookie contracts. I don't think that's very likely now after year one of Scoot. I don't think he's going to have to take some big leaps to be all-star in the West in his first 4 years from where he was in year one. That doesn't mean he can't have some successful outcomes. But for me, my own personal expectations, I think the ceiling has lowered quite a bit. I still think he has a wide array of positive outcomes because I think of his playmaking and just his general size for his position. It's he could be Markelle Fultz or something like that for an extended period of time. Even if the offense never figures it out, he could be a guy who has a positive impact as a veteran for some seasons forward. I realize Markelle Fultz is not exactly a high level compliment and currently unemployed, but I'm saying if things go wrong, I could still see that for Scoot. I could still see him being an above average starter in the NBA. I could still see him maybe at some point making an all-star team, but the idea that he would do that in his first 4 seasons, which I felt pretty strongly should be a expectation, because they should, when you draft a lead guard, a point guard that high, that's the outcome you need for it to be valuable if you're going to draft at that position, including some examples of players ahead of him. That's kind of where I was with my expectations a year ago. And then they've come down considerably. I still think that he showed enough improvement at the end of last season to feel better about him. But for me, the number that stands out, and I've said this several times in the show, and I'll say it again here in the preview, is 14. Scoot dunked the ball 14 times his rookie season. It's about 1 every 4.5 games that he played. It's 1 a week. His path to being a good NBA player is being someone who lives at the rim. Because he's not going to be this knockdown shooter, right? He's not freaking Damian Lillard. And he's pretty clearly maybe not Russell Westbrook, right? He's not like this dude who just jumps out of the gym, but he's someone who needs to get to the rim with a lot more frequency, particularly in the half court. He's got to figure out how to turn his athleticism into functional attacking of the basket, functional getting himself to the rim. 14 is way too low. He can't be dunking like CJ freaking McCollum. Dude dunks less than Jeff Teague. What are we doing? He's got to, to me, that's where my expectations have changed. If Scoot shows early in the season that he's kind of figured out how to use his athleticism in more functional ways, then my expectations can change quickly. I'll say, okay, he's figured that out. But for me now, it's I'm hoping that Scoot shows enough promise that I can feel like he has a path to being a high-level starter in the league. But my expectations aren't really that, they're important because I want to share my opinions with you. The expectations I am curious about. What are the franchise's expectations? Do they ever at any point make sure Scoot Henderson starts? Do they ever turn the keys over to him? Or if you assume relative health in front of him, does he only play when one of the other guards is hurt? Is there a certain point where they say, okay, this thing has changed. We absolutely have to trade Anthony Simons, and when we do that, we have to prioritize getting players back who won't start ahead of Scoot, right? Or who are comfortable coming off the bench behind Scoot because Scoot has earned it. Or if Scoot hasn't earned it, again, earned is for good teams, rookies should earn it. For bad teams, you earn it. Franchise investment earns you those opportunities, right? But you might not share that opinion. But for me, it's like, if they ever think like, okay, we need to give him the chance to drive this thing. When does that happen? And what does that look like? And does that happen at Christmas? Does it happen at the trade deadline? Does it ever happen this year? What I'm really curious this year, and the thing that I will kind of monitor with Scoot Henderson, is how much does it seem like the Blazers, who have, Joe Cronin openly stated, we're going to do everything we can to build around Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson. He said that this offseason at a press conference. When does that happen? When do we see that? Because that's a shift. That's not what they're doing right now. They're saying that, but that's not what they're doing. When does that happen? For me, my expectations might be a little lower, but I'm not around him every day. I don't see him every day. I'm not like a professional scout like the people who work for the Portland Trail Blazers, right? I am curious when that shift happens and what it looks like. What are the expectations internally? To me, that's much more fascinating than like me thinking Scoot doesn't dunk enough because he can't get his feet under him to be more explosive, or he doesn't jump off 2 feet very well. He jumps off 1 foot and looks pretty good, but when he jumps off 2 feet, he looks small. That's my opinion. But my opinion can, I'm comfortable being wrong and changing, hey, I used to think this, now I think this type of thing. I'm curious when the Blazers, how their expectations shift on him, because Scoot's got a huge year in front of him, not because like he's doomed or whatever, but because like there's decisions to be made. And if he struggles like he did in year one, decisions are going to be made. And if he breaks out in a way that he's capable of with his sort of talent level and his feel as a playmaker, decisions will be made in the other direction. And as the Blazers continue forward, they can't just be in the lottery for eternity, right? At some point, they have to try to win games. And I would assume that at some point comes in the near future. And one of the things you're going to find out this year is which of the young players on the team are going to help you win games. That goes for Shea, that goes for Klingon, that goes for Scoot Henderson and others, right? But like Scoot is, when you get drafted number 3 overall, you're the first part of that question. Does this dude help us win games? And what does that look like? What is he going to need? What is he going to bring? And I think what the huge thing for Scoot in year 2 is, as he improves, how does he answer that question? And then how do the Blazers apply that improvement to their decision-making going forward? Fascinating year for him. Super excited to watch him. I think he's a really fascinating case study in the whole Blazers building up type of stage that they're in, because Scoot is going to answer a lot of questions with his play one way or another. The next time I talk to you, it's going to be Media Day. I'm going to record a show. Obviously, these shows come out in the morning. So I'm going to record a show Sunday talking about Media Day, the biggest questions facing this team heading into Media Day. Tuesday show, the Media Day is going to be Monday morning, holding at Veterans Memorial Coliseum. I'm going to attend, and on Tuesday's show, I will talk about everything we've learned, and then training camp starts. It's here. Basketball's begun next week. The NBA season is upon us. I'm super excited. I hope you are too, because it's what we do 5 days a week right here on this podcast, everywhere you get podcasts, and also on YouTube, free on all your platforms. So tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.